So today we're tackling one of the greatest, most enduring cinematic franchises in global history. We're talking about James Bond.
It's just a monumental story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It starts with Ian Fleming creating the character back in 1953.
And from there, it just blossoms into this huge global phenomenon. We're looking at 27 films stretching over 6 decades.
It's incredible. And the list of actors who have stepped into that tuxedo, it's remarkable.
You have Sean Connery, David Niven, George Lazenby,
Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton.
Pierce Brosnan, and of course Daniel Craig. That's 7 different men who've defined Agent 007 for generations of moviegoers.
And our mandate today is, well, it's not just to list the films. We want to conduct a really intensive analysis of this whole body of work.
Yeah.
We're going to trace the production history, look at the immense financial side of things, the critical reception over the years, and really the core stories that define Bond and have allowed him to evolve.
Let's just start with the sheer scale of it all. This isn't just a film series, it's an industry.
It is. 27 productions in total. But the absolute cornerstone, the bedrock of it all, has to be Eon Productions.
Eon. Founded by Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, they produced 25 of those 27 films.
And their real genius right from the start was structural. They established a holding company, Danjaq, in 1962.
So right after Dr. No was a hit.
Immediately after. And this was specifically to hold the rights for all future productions. It's a clever mechanism. Eon handles the making of the films, but Danjaq holds the intellectual property. It shields the core assets.
And that structure, that's what's provided the stability for, 60 years? Even when things got complicated with distributors or financing.
Exactly. And that legal separation is also what created the room for those two major non-Eon exceptions to happen. It all came down to disputed rights.
We absolutely have to get into those legal battles later. They really did shape the whole history. But I think we have to start with the foundation, the money.
To understand why Bond has persisted for so long, you have to follow the economics.
Okay, so let's get into the financial architecture and the changing ownership. Tracing the corporate side of this reveals a pretty fascinating story.
What's really striking is just how quickly they established the blueprint. Broccoli and Saltzman got the film rights to the novels in 1961. They founded Eon, and then they immediately partnered with a major studio, United Artists, for the financing on Dr. No.
So that was the template right from the start. Producer vision, backed by major studio money and distribution.
And it was a template that held for more than 50 years.
And the results of that partnership are they're breathtaking. If you look at the raw numbers, the unadjusted box office gross, the series totals $7.8 billion.
Which makes it the 5th highest grossing film series in the world.
But that's the nominal figure.
And for a franchise this old, that figure is, frankly, misleading. The real indicator of its scale is when you adjust for inflation.
Right.
If we use $2022 to standardize the earnings, the revenue from just the 25 Eon films, it swells to over $19.2 billion.
$19.2 billion.
And then, if you factor in the 2 non-Eon films, the grand total pushes past $20 billion. This isn't just a successful series, it's a global asset of almost unparalleled value.
20 billion puts it in the same conversation as things like Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It absolutely does. And that adjustment is so vital because it properly contextualizes those huge early hits. I mean, films like Goldfinger and Thunderball, you could argue they invented the modern blockbuster.
And this shows their true drawing power compared to films today.
Correct. Goldfinger, for example, costs very little to make by today's standards, but its inflation-adjusted gross revenue is competitive with some of the biggest blockbusters of the 21st century. That history of efficiency and massive returns is what made the IP so valuable.
But even with all that stability, the corporate structure is facing, its biggest disruption in decades, right? We have to talk about the huge shift that started in 2025.
This is a monumental pivot. In February 2025, the news came out that Amazon MGM Studios had gained full creative control over the franchise.
And that's not just a change in who distributes the movies.
Not at all. It's a change in the central engine room. And the news that came with it was just as significant. The longtime producers, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, were stepping down from active producing.
They're still co-owners, though.
They retain their role as co-owners, which is critical, but they're not producing the films day-to-day anymore.
And that is a definitive end of an era. The Broccoli family stewardship has been the one constant behind the scenes, from Connery all the way through Craig. They set the tone, the style, the casting.
So the immediate question became, who steps into those incredibly large shoes?
And Amazon and GM moved pretty fast.
They did. In March 2025, they announced the new producers would be Amy Pascal from Pascal Pictures and David Heyman of Heyday Films.
Two producers with massive track records.
Wildly successful and critically acclaimed properties between them. So this marks a completely new stewardship for a $20 billion plus legacy.
Okay, so let's track how the investment needed to maintain that legacy has evolved. The budgets, when you adjust them to 2024 dollars, they tell their own story about blockbuster filmmaking.
The initial efficiency is almost shocking. Dr. No's actual budget was $1.1 million.
Which in today's money is what?
A mere $11.3 million. And yet that tiny investment yielded an adjusted gross of $722.6 million. That's an unbelievable return.
A perfect example of a lean thriller just maximizing its reach. But the budget scaled up pretty quickly after that.
Immediately, reflecting the audience hunger. By 1965, with Thunderball, the adjusted budget was already $67.5 million.
That's nearly 6 times the cost of Dr. No, just 3 years earlier.
It shows the massive financial leap they had to take to deliver the escalating spectacle that audiences were now demanding.
And that trend really accelerated with Roger Moore, didn't it? Things got bigger.
Much bigger, culminating in spectacles that, well, stretched reality. You look at Moonrakers in 1979. The actual budget was $34 million, which is $147.3 million today.
A 9-figure budget to send Bond into space.
Exactly. They were capitalizing on that post-Star Wars appetite for science fiction, and it required a massive commitment.
But the real transformation, where Bond becomes this 9-figure industrial machine, that happens under Daniel Craig. The budgets just soared.
They peaked with Spectre. The investment in that film is staggering. The reported production budget alone was somewhere between $245 and $250 million.
And that's before marketing.
Right. Sources indicate that if you include the $100 million plus global marketing budget, the total investment was approaching $350 million.
$350 million.
Even using the lowest production figure and adjusting it, you're talking about a commitment of over $325 million in 2024 dollars. That level of spending puts Bond among the absolute most expensive film properties in the world.
It's an incredible financial leap from that lean $11 million thriller in the 60s to a $350 million global investment today.
And that leap is mirrored perfectly in the scale of ambition you see in the stories themselves. The story of Bond is inseparable from the resources they had to tell it.
Absolutely, which is a perfect transition. Let's look at the Eon filmography now, tracking the actors and the narrative shifts. This is where we trace the mythology through the men who played the part.
And the foundational blueprint for everything that came after. That belongs squarely to the Connery era, 1962 to 67, and then his return in 71. He established the tone, the cruelty, the style, and the core villains.
The Connery films gave us the absolute core of the mythology. It started right away in Dr. No and From Russia with Love, with the introduction of Spectre.
The special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion. This wasn't just a generic crime syndicate. It was a highly organized transnational network.
In Dr. No, their goal was to disrupt the American Project Mercury space launch.
From a base in the Caribbean, yes. And then immediately in From Russia with Love, the plot becomes much more personal. Spectre wants revenge on Bond for killing Dr. No.
And they used that Soviet Lecter cryptographic device as bait to lure him into a trap.
A trap masterminded by Rosa Klebb and Kronstein. It's classic espionage.
But then comes Goldfinger in 1964. And this is arguably the film that turns the franchise from a successful series into a global pop culture event.
It really is. This film solidifies that blend of spectacle and gadgetry. And you can't discuss Goldfinger without, of course, mentioning the debut of the Aston Martin DB5.
Which became a character in its own right. It shows up 7 more times, all the way to No Time to Die.
And the plot of Goldfinger was just a masterclass in high-stakes villainy. Or Goldfinger wasn't just planning a robbery.
No, his plan, Operation Grand Slam, was much bigger. He was going to contaminate the U.S. gold reserve at Fort Knox with a dirty bomb,
making the entire stockpile useless and massively inflating the value of his own private gold holdings. It was diabolical.
And he had his terrifying henchman, Oddjob, with that lethal bowler hat. There's also that detail where he kills the U.S. mafiosi he'd hired, just to avoid paying them.
It just shows his extreme cruelty and greed.
Connery's initial run ends with You Only Live Twice, where we finally see Blofeld's face operating from his volcano lair.
And capturing American and Soviet spacecraft. And then Connery returns one last time for Eon in Diamonds Are Forever, which again leads back to Blofeld, this time with a laser satellite he plans to auction off.
Which brings us to a really unique and often overlooked moment, the Lazenby interlude in 1969.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Just one film for George Lazenby, but its narrative impact is huge because of the emotional weight it puts on Bond.
This film is a monumental shift. Bond is hunting Blofeld, but he meets and genuinely falls in love with Tracy DiVincenzo. He even marries her.
It's the one time Bond finds real personal happiness and stability.
Which makes the ending so powerful and so necessary for the character.
It's just devastatingly tragic. Shortly after the wedding, as they're driving, Tracy is shot and murdered by Irma Bunt, Blofeld's partner.
A truly terrible moment.
It's a raw, emotional wound. Bond finds true love, only to have it violently ripped away. And that trauma, that vulnerability, it defined his internal life for decades. Even if the later films didn't always mention it, it set a precedent for personal stakes that wouldn't be matched until the Daniel Craig era.
And after that darkness, we enter the Moore decades, from 1973 to 1985. And Roger Moore immediately took the series in a dramatically different direction, lighter, more fantastical.
It started with Live and Let Die in '73. The Moore era was very quick to adapt to contemporary pop culture.
So instead of Cold War spies, we get elements of the blaxploitation genre, voodoo, and drug production.
The villain, Dr. Kananga, is both a Caribbean dictator and an American gangster, Mr. Big. His operation was massive. He was producing 2 tons of heroin and using the local fear of the occult to keep his poppy field secure.
And they just kept pushing the ambition. With Moonraker in '79, it's a huge shift from drug lords to, well, high-tech space paranoia.
It feels like a direct response to Star Wars, doesn't it? A maximalist pivot to sci-fi espionage. And Hugo Drax's plot was apocalyptic.
He wanted to wipe out all human life on Earth with a nerve gas.
And then repopulate the planet with a hand-picked, genetically perfect master race from his hidden space station. The scale of the threat had reached its absolute zenith, the destruction of all humanity.
You can't really top that. But even in Moore's last film, A View to a Kill in 1985, the threat was still geographically devastating.
Max Zorin's plan in that film was all about corporate monopoly. He wanted global control of the microchip market.
So he planned to trigger massive floods along the Hayward and San Andreas faults.
By detonating explosives, yes. The idea was to destroy all his competitors in Silicon Valley. It's a very high-tech corporate threat disguised as a natural disaster.
So after all that high-tech escapism, we get the Dalton era, 1987 to '89, a brief but really crucial period of recalibration.
Timothy Dalton's 2 films, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, deliberately brought back a grittier, more grounded tone. It was necessary to bring Bond back from space, so to speak.
The Living Daylights felt more like a classical spy thriller. But the key moment of the Dalton run has to be A License to Kill.
Undeniably. The whole narrative is driven by personal loyalty and raw, unfiltered revenge. It completely overrides his professional duties.
The stakes are set so early with that devastating personal trauma.
Yes. The drug lord front Sanchez escapes, and in revenge, he maims Bond's CIA friend, Felix Leiter, and then horribly, brutally kills Leiter's wife.
It's an incredibly shocking and awful act of violence. You feel for the victims, Leiter and his wife, so deeply, it just breaks Bond.
It does. And when M orders him to drop the pursuit and return to duty, Bond flatly refuses. He says it's his duty to his friend. M is forced to revoke his license to kill, and Bond just goes completely rogue.
And this is a deliberate risk, right? To show Bond ditching his orders for personal revenge.
A genuine risk, and a necessary injection of consequence for the character. It forced the audience to see that Bond is a man capable of intense loyalty and righteous fury, willing to sacrifice his entire career for justice. That personal motivation really set the stage for what was to come.
That brings us to the Brosnan era, starting in 1995. After the Cold War, and after a 6-year hiatus, which was the longest in the series' history.
GoldenEye was the big post-Cold War relaunch. The whole threat paradigm had to change. The Soviets weren't the enemy anymore.
So the focus shifted inward. The threat wasn't an external superpower, it was a former 00 agent.
Alec Trevelyan, Agent Zero-6. He'd faked his death 9 years earlier. The idea of a rogue 00 turning against Britain was really potent.
And his organization, Janus, steals the GoldenEye satellite weapon,
which emits a massive electromagnetic pulse capable of wiping out digital data. His goal was pure financial terrorism and revenge against the UK. He planned to use the pulse to erase all the financial records at the Bank of England, destroying the British economy.
A very 90s digital kind of threat.
Exactly. And the Brosnan films kept up that mix of high stakes and high technology, culminating in Die Another Day.
Which starts with a narrative element we'd never seen before in an Eon film.
That's right. Bond is captured in North Korea and subjected to brutal torture for 14 months.
14 months. That's a crucial piece of character history. He's never endured that kind of sustained torment before.
And when he gets back, he's suspected of leaking information. But he goes on his own mission to track down the man responsible, who has used gene therapy to assume the identity of a British billionaire, Gustav Graves.
And Graves has the Icarus Mirror satellite, a sun gun.
A massive orbital weapon designed to concentrate solar energy into a beam powerful enough to cut a path through the Korean DMZ, forcing a reunification of the two countries. It was a technologically extreme threat that really capped off the spectacle of the Brosnan era.
Which leads us directly into the Craig reboot and the conclusion of that arc. This era completely reset the clock. It stripped away the camp and focused on serialized storytelling.
Casino Royale in 2006 was that necessary fundamental restart. It shows us Bond earning his vessel status.
Yeah.
The plot focuses on the terrorist financier Le Chiffre.
But the narrative really hinges on the emotional trauma from the double agent, Vesper Lind.
Absolutely. Vesper is being coerced by this villainous organization, and she ultimately sacrifices herself to save Bond. She dies, leaving Bond deeply scarred and convinced she betrayed him. That raw, personal trauma feeds directly into Quantum of Solace.
The first direct sequel in the franchise's history.
It picks up moments after Casino Royale ends. Bond is dealing with the organization that coerced Vesper, a group called Quantum. Their plot is insidious. They plan to seize control of Bolivia's entire freshwater supply.
That focus on ecological and corporate terror was a hallmark of the Craig villains.
It was. And Bond also gets a measure of closure about Vesper. He finds and brings to justice her former lover, the man who was responsible for coercing her. It concludes that initial arc.
And the narrative cohesion just ramps up from there, starting with Skyfall in 2012.
Skyfall focuses entirely on the vulnerability of MI6 and specifically M's past. The villain is Raul Silva, a former top agent who M had surrendered to the Chinese years before.
And his goal is deeply personal revenge against M.
Which leads to that assault on her home. And despite Bond's efforts to save her, M is tragically killed in the conflict.
The death of M was a huge shock. A constant presence for almost 2 decades, gone. And this leads to the ultimate reveal in Spectre.
The trail Bond follows after M's death leads him to this sinister organization, Spectre, led by Franz Oberhauser. And Oberhauser reveals his true identity.
Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
But the twist wasn't just the name, it was the personal connection.
A deep, shocking connection to Bond's childhood.
Yes. Blofeld reveals this personal vendetta that stems from childhood jealousy. His father took in the orphan James Bond, and Blofeld resented it intensely. He claims he murdered his own father, faked his death, and reinvented himself as the mastermind of Spectre.
And he takes responsibility for everything Bond has suffered. The death of Vesper, the death of M, all of it was part of a calculated effort to torment him.
So Blofeld wasn't just a supervillain. He was Bond's jealous stepbrother, using Spectre's terror attacks to create the instability that would make his Nine Eyes global intelligence network seem indispensable.
The personal stakes were at their absolute peak. And this all leads to the conclusion in No Time to Die.
A film with the immense task of closing that entire 5-film arc. It introduces the Heracles weapon.
A nanoscale bioweapon.
And it's programmable by a genetic marker, a targeted killer, and the film just starts layering on the tragedy from there.
It starts with the death of his old friend, Felix Leiter. A terrible loss.
Yes, Leiter dies after being betrayed by a colleague while trying to help Bond. And this forces Bond out of retirement to seek vengeance. It all culminates with the villain, Safin, capturing Madeleine Swan, the woman Bond loves, and their 5-year-old daughter, Mathilde.
And then comes the ultimate sacrifice, the definitive end.
Safin infects Bond with a strain of the nanobots that are programmed specifically to kill Madeleine and his confirmed daughter, Mathilde. It's the ultimate inescapable trap.
He can't go near them ever again.
He can't. So, after confirming Mathilde is his daughter, and sharing a final, heartbreaking farewell, Bond chooses to sacrifice himself. He stays on Safin's island base to ensure the incoming missile strike destroys the Heracles factory, and him along with it.
Concluding his service, his mission, and his life to save his family. A deeply sympathetic and powerful end.
A definitive end to that arc. But to really appreciate the complexity of this franchise, we have to look at the disruptive elements that challenged Eon's control. The legal entanglements, and the non-Eon films.
The production history is so defined by messy legal paperwork. Eon's control was almost absolute, but there are these two significant outliers.
Both stemming from rights that Ian Fleming had sold off before Eon even existed.
And the first is the completely absurd and unique Casino Royale from 1967. How did that novel escape the Eon umbrella?
Fleming sold the rights to that one novel separately way back in 1954 to a producer named Gregory Ratoff. The rights eventually passed to Charles K. Feldman, and he refused to sell them to Eon.
So instead, he produced this massive, star-studded Bond spoof with David Niven as the retired Sir James Bond.
It's wonderfully chaotic. The retired Bond is brought back to deal with S. Mersch, and the ultimate mastermind is revealed to be his own nephew, Jimmy Bond, also known as Dr. Noah.
And his evil plan
Was to use biological warfare to kill all tall men, leaving him as the biggest, most desirable man left in the world.
It's peak 60s absurdity. The whole casino explodes at the end, killing everyone.
And from a business perspective, it was highly successful. It grossed $44.4 million, which is over $400 million today. It proved the Bond brand was so powerful that even a parody could compete on a global scale.
But the real challenge to Eon came in 1983.
With Never Say Never Again, this is all based on a long-standing rights conflict over the story for Thunderball.
Because the producer, Kevin McClory, had retained specific adaptation rights.
Yes, from a legal settlement confirming he co-wrote a screenplay with Fleming that became the basis for the novel. So while he and Eon collaborated on the 1965 film Thunderball, McClory still had the rights to readapt the story elements.
And he did in 1983, bringing Sean Connery back. And it was released in the same year as Eon's official Bond film, Octopussy.
The rivalry was intense. The plot is essentially a remake of Thunderball Bond investigating Spectre's hijacking of nuclear warheads, and it was a huge financial success.
It grossed $160 million, which is about $489 million today. It was a potent rival to Octopussy.
And what it really showed is that the global box office could actually support two competing James Bond films at the same time. The brand was that elastic.
It's incredible, a $20 billion phenomenon defined by disputed screenplay rights. Okay, let's shift gears and look at the external validation of all this, the accolades and critical perspective.
You know, for all its escapist action, the series has received genuine cinematic recognition. Over its history, the Eon series has won 6 Academy Awards.
And the early wins were all for technical mastery, right?
That's correct. The very first awards recognized the innovation in the production. Best sound effects for Goldfinger in '65, and then visual effects for the underwater work in Thunderball the next year.
And we can't overlook the recognition for the main architect himself.
Albert R. Broccoli. He received the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award in 1982, recognizing his entire career as a producer in sustaining this franchise.
In the modern era, though, the Bond Oscar has shifted. It's become all about the original song.
It's a fascinating trend. It highlights how important the theme song has become to the brand. We see this unbroken run of wins, starting with Skyfall.
Adele and Paul Epworth won for that one.
Then Sam Smith and Jimmy Napes won for Spectre. And most recently, Billie Eilish and Phineas O'Connell won for No Time to Die.
That's 3 wins in the last decade. It confirms the theme song is now this essential award-winning part of the franchise. And that's not even counting the nominations for iconic songs like Live and Let Die or Nobody Does It Better.
The music is absolutely critical. But to get a balanced view, we should also look at the critical reception over the years, using aggregated scores.
And what's interesting there is that the most lauded films are either from the very beginning or from the most recent reboot.
The critical peaks are consistently high. Goldfinger is at an incredible 99% approval rating. From Russia with Love is at 97%, Dr. No at 95%. This shows that initial gritty blueprint remains perfect in the eyes of many critics.
And in the modern era.
The high point is the reboot. Casino Royale hit 94%, and Skyfall achieved 92%.
So the highest quality, according to critics, is when the franchise either established its original blueprint or when it did a hard reset and rebuilt the character with emotional focus.
Precisely. And in contrast, you can clearly see the lowest critical points. They tend to happen in the later Roger Moore era, where spectacle sometimes overshadowed plotting. A View to a Kill is down to 36%. The Man with the Golden Gun at 40%.
We also have cinema score data, which shows what audiences thought on opening weekend.
And the audience reception is always enlightening. The public rated the modern entries very highly. Skyfall got an A, Casino Royale an A-.
But the darker, serialized tone sometimes got a mixed reaction.
Right. Quantum of Solace received a B-, suggesting audiences maybe struggled with a sequel that felt more like a second act than a standalone adventure.
So we've covered the $20 billion scope, the 7 actors, the narrative shifts, the legal headaches, the critical triumphs. It's a synthesis of art, industry, and law.
If you synthesize all this material, the central theme is absolutely clear. The James Bond franchise is this unique blend of cinematic mythology and incredibly complex corporate maneuvering.
The character is a globe-trotting spy, but the enterprise itself has always been tethered to these very real-world legal battles and massive financing debates.
An industrial empire built on stable legal rights and huge audience commitment. And that industrial scale is exactly why the 2025 shift is so significant. An asset this vast requires meticulous stewardship.
It raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. The Daniel Craig era ended with unparalleled narrative finality. We saw Bond confirm he had a daughter and then sacrifice himself to save her.
So the new production leadership under Amazon MGM and the new producers Amy Pascal and David Heyman, they now have to take this immense $20 billion legacy and find a way forward.
They have to honor the mythology, but also overcome the huge narrative challenge set by that emotionally complex, definitive final act of Daniel Craig's tenure.
How will they construct a fresh narrative that both respects that history and provides a compelling path forward for 007?
We'll all be watching closely to find out.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening.